The diagnostic landscape of a collapsing marriage is just incredibly murky. I mean, you've got raw emotions, a tangled shared history, and the incredibly messy fallout of two lives trying to, well, violently uncouple.
It's chaotic, but today, for this deep dive, we are examining a situation where someone managed to treat a catastrophic emotional betrayal with the exact same cold, binary precision of an engineer reading a medical x-ray.
Yeah, it's wild. We are going to extract the actionable advice from this multi-part saga that went absolutely viral on Reddit. It comes from the 34-year-old industrial equipment sales manager.
And we're approaching this as if you, the listener, are a friend going through a high-stress relationship conflict. Because, honestly, almost everyone will face some form of severe betrayal or relational collapse in their lifetime.
Right, whether it's a romantic partner, a business partnership gone sour, or like a deeply toxic family dynamic. The core question is how you survive a sudden betrayal without losing your mind, your money, or your boundaries.
And what's fascinating here is that the author of this story treats his collapsing marriage the same way he treats a broken conveyor belt in his warehouse.
With methodical troubleshooting.
Exactly, with cold, methodical troubleshooting. And that approach might just be the ultimate survival guide.
So let's look at the baseline of this relationship before the crisis hits, because it sets up the stakes perfectly. Our author is 34, and he's working in industrial equipment sales.
Specifically, he sells conveyor belts and packaging machinery.
Yeah, and he's been at his company for 8 years. He worked his way up to a regional manager. His wife, Sarah, is 31. She works as a part-time yoga instructor and does freelance graphic design.
And they have been together for 6 years, married for 3. But crucially, they entered this marriage with a prenuptial agreement.
Which is a huge
A
detail.
massive detail. He mentions having watched coworkers get completely financially destroyed in divorces, which is incredibly common in those high-stress, high-hour corporate jobs.
Oh, for sure. So they signed a prenup that strictly protects the assets they each brought into the marriage. And it clearly delineates the division of assets acquired during it.
And at the time, she was entirely supportive of this agreement.
Right. So the tension really begins to build around a very mundane issue, a car.
Yeah. It's always something simple, isn't it?
It really is. Sarah drives a 2019 vehicle that is starting to have transmission issues. It's not completely dead, but, it's unreliable. And she wants a certified, pre-owned Subaru Outback.
Which is not cheap. We are talking about a $28,000 expense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they don't just have that kind of cash sitting in a checking account.
Yeah.
Because they have been aggressively paying down his student loans and their mortgage.
But he decides he wants to provide this for her anyway. He thinks she deserves a reliable vehicle, so he just starts picking up massive amounts of overtime.
And in the industrial equipment world, emergencies happen at all hours. He begins working 65 to 70-hour weeks for about 2 months.
2 months of that is grueling. He takes weekend shifts, evening calls, covers for colleagues, and every single extra penny from this schedule goes into a separate savings bucket.
Right, he calls it the car fund. And he manages to squirrel away $12,000 entirely from his own surplus labor.
Which is incredible discipline. But while he is out working those 70-hour weeks, Sarah's best friend, Monica, starts coming over frequently to keep her company.
Yeah, Monica works for a healthcare startup and is recently divorced. And the author views this as a positive thing.
Because he thinks, well, my wife has a support system. She has companionship while I'm physically absent, grinding away to buy her this Subaru.
But then we hit the catalyst. It's a Tuesday. He gets dispatched to what is supposed to be a 3-hour emergency repair on a massive mechanical system.
But it turns out to be a simple, dirty sensor.
Yeah, a 20-minute fix. He cleans it and heads home, arriving at 7:30 p.m. instead of his usual 10:00 p.m.
And this early arrival changes everything.
It's the sliding doors moment. He walks into his house, hears Sarah and Monica talking in the kitchen, and goes to quietly grab a beer from the fridge just to let them know he's home.
And that is when he overhears a conversation that completely dismantles his reality.
They are not talking about yoga or graphic design. They are actively plotting Sarah's affair.
It's chilling.
Let me quote the source material directly, because the phrasing is what makes this so clinical. He hears Sarah say that with him working so much overtime, it felt like the, quote, perfect opportunity to see what else was out there.
The opportunism is staggering. I mean,
Yeah.
she is actively utilizing the very overtime he is working to buy her a car as a logistical window to betray him.
She is literally weaponizing his provision.
Yes. And Monica, the best friend, is entirely on board. She tells Sarah it's time to stop overthinking it, and even offers to help manage the logistics of the affair.
But the moment that truly shifts the author's worldview happens next. Sarah expresses a brief moment of worry about the financial implications if things go wrong.
Right. She's doing a risk assessment.
And Monica dismisses the concern by pointing out that Sarah could always just come back to her current marriage if the new fling didn't work out.
Because Monica states that the husband would probably take her back since he is, quote, too nice for his own good.
Wow. Too nice for his own good.
That specific phrase transforms the marriage from a partnership into a utility. They are banking on his baseline decency as their safety net.
They are treating his commitment and his income as a backup plan, a guaranteed baseline of security to return to if the affair doesn't pan out.
And if we look at standard human behavior, especially what we see on reality television or like in dramatic movies, the expected reaction here is explosive.
Oh, totally. You drop the beer. You storm into the kitchen, demand answers, throw plates, and blow the entire situation up right there in the middle of the kitchen island.
Because that explosive reaction is driven by the fight or flight response. When a human being perceives a massive threat, the amygdala takes over.
And a profound relational betrayal is absolutely interpreted by the brain's circuitry as a massive threat to fundamental safety.
Exactly. It's a threat to stability. The amygdala is the fear and emotional processing center of the brain. When it detects a catastrophic threat, it initiates an amygdala hijack.
It floods the body with adrenaline and cortisol.
And during this hijack, the prefrontal cortex, which handles logic, reasoning, and long-term planning, is essentially bypassed. Pure, unadulterated emotional reactivity takes the wheel.
But he manages to bypass that biological imperative. Which brings us to the first major lesson in crisis management for you, the listener. The power of the pause.
The pause is everything.
He quietly sets his beer down on a side table. He walks back out to his truck. He sits in the driver's seat for 10 minutes, just letting the adrenaline wash over him.
He literally rides out the physiological wave.
Yeah. Then he starts the engine and drives around aimlessly for an hour. Finally, he comes back home, walks inside, and acts as if absolutely nothing has changed.
She asks how his day was, he says fine, and they go to sleep.
It's nuts. Psychologically, this is an astonishing display of executive function.
It really is. By physically removing himself from the environment, by walking out to that truck, he prevented the amygdala hijack from dictating his actions.
Right. He forced his body to process that initial violent surge of cortisol in a controlled, isolated environment.
And driving around for an hour gave his prefrontal cortex the necessary time to come back online and reassert control over his behavior.
I think of this through a specific analogy. He essentially treats his marriage like a complex software system. He is the system administrator who just discovered a catastrophic security breach.
The hackers are currently inside the mainframe.
Exactly. But instead of screaming at the hackers and letting them know he sees them, which would only cause them to scramble, hide their tracks, and deploy defensive malware.
He quietly unplugs his own monitor.
Yes. He steps back to assess the damage and gather data without alerting the threat.
A lot of people might assume that holding in that level of shock and anger is toxic or unhealthy. There is a frequent confusion between bottling up emotions and strategic containment.
What's the real difference there? Because they sound similar.
Well, bottling up is suppressing an emotion indefinitely, refusing to ever process it, and pretending the trauma didn't occur. That leads to severe psychological and physical stress.
But strategic containment is different.
Very different. Strategic containment is acknowledging the emotion, feeling the physiological response in the truck, but consciously choosing the timeline and the arena in which to act on it.
It is a tactical necessity in high-stakes conflicts.
If you confront someone the very second you catch them in a lie, you hand them the opportunity to gaslight you, to backtrack, to minimize their actions, or to destroy evidence.
By pausing, he locked in the objective reality of the situation before she could muddy the waters.
And staying mentally grounded in a moment like that requires a brutal confrontation with reality.
When you discover a betrayal of this magnitude, you aren't just losing the relationship, you are losing the entire narrative of the relationship.
In that truck, he had to let the fantasy of his marriage die.
He had to accept that the woman sitting in the kitchen was not the partner he thought he married. She was someone calculating a risk assessment on his capacity for forgiveness.
Had he run into the kitchen crying, he would have been subconsciously begging her to reassure him that the fantasy was still real.
But by walking away, he accepted the new, terrible reality.
And he lived in that uncomfortable new reality for several days. He simply watches her operate.
And what does she do? She begins dropping what he describes as real subtle hints.
She talks about feeling like she's stuck in a routine and needing space to figure things out.
She even floats a highly manipulative philosophical question, asking him if he thinks people could deeply love each other, but still need to explore other connections.
It is a textbook example of trickle-truthing and soft launching an affair.
Soft launching an affair. That's exactly what it is.
Cheaters often use this tactic to gauge their partner's boundaries and minimize their own cognitive dissonance.
By slowly drip-feeding the concept of separation or external connections, they are testing the waters to see if they can get permission to cheat.
Or at least soften the blow so they don't have to view themselves as the villain. They want the transition to seem like a natural evolution of the relationship rather than a sudden betrayal.
But he just sits there, armed with the truth, and lets her play her hand. Finally, on Friday evening, she initiates the formal conversation.
And what's her angle?
She claims they got married too young, which he mentally notes is absurd since they were 28 and 31.
Right, hardly high school sweethearts.
Then she delivers the classic line, "I love you, but I'm not in love with you."
Oh, classic.
Her proposed solution is a temporary separation where she stays at Monica's apartment for a few weeks to gain perspective.
Notice the framing here. She is attempting to elevate her desire to sleep with someone else into a noble journey of self-discovery.
She even dangles the hope that if they are truly meant to be together, they will find their way back to each other.
It is calculated, emotional manipulation designed to keep him securely on the hook, maintaining that safety net Monica mentioned while she goes off to explore this new connection without guilt.
So he asks her a direct, point-blank question. Is there someone else?
And she lies.
She looks him right in the eye and says no, absolutely not. She would never do that to him.
So our author, exercising that immense mental discipline, simply agrees.
He tells her that if she needs space, he understands. He says he will just keep working, keep saving money, and give her all the room she needs.
He doesn't fight the separation at all.
Which is brilliant, because the mental grounding he achieved in the truck wasn't just about avoiding a useless argument.
No, it bought him the operational runway for the next phase of his survival guide.
While Sarah believes she has brilliantly orchestrated a risk-free trial separation, she has actually handed him the exact logistical window he needs to secure his assets.
And this brings us to the tactical retreat, protecting the finances.
She moves out on Sunday. She packs her clothes, grabs her laptop, hugs him at the door, and reiterates that this isn't necessarily the end, just a pause.
Most people in this scenario would spend that Sunday evening staring at the wall or crying into their spouse's old T-shirts.
But what he didn't tell her was that he had already called a divorce attorney on Thursday morning, before she even officially requested the separation.
He knew the request was imminent based on the kitchen conversation and her subsequent hints.
Then, on Monday morning, the very day after she relocates to Monica's, he goes directly to the bank.
This transition from emotional shock to financial fortification highlights a critical rule for protecting individual finances during a complex separation.
Which is?
You must understand your legal standing before you take action.
Right, he didn't just log into his banking app and start draining accounts blindly out of anger.
No, he knew exactly what he was legally permitted to do because of the prenuptial agreement they had signed.
The prenup clearly dictated that assets brought into the marriage remain separate, and crucially, it protected his individual work earnings during the marriage.
Operating under that legal safety net, he takes immediate action. He moves all of their liquid savings into a new private account solely in his name.
This critically includes the $12,000 car fund that he had generated entirely through his recent exhausting overtime shifts.
He leaves the joint checking account open to avoid completely freezing shared operational expenses, which is smart.
But he reroutes his corporate direct deposit so his future paychecks will no longer drop into a shared pool.
Then on Tuesday, he has the formal divorce papers drawn up.
And he explicitly notes in the source material that the paperwork isn't vindictive. It is a straightforward dissolution of marriage citing irreconcilable differences.
The prenup makes the mechanics clean. Keep what you brought in, split the proceeds from the eventual sale of the house, and waive alimony.
But I have to play devil's advocate for a moment here. On behalf of a listener who might be uncomfortable with this level of clinical detachment,
Sure.
a lot of people hearing this story might feel that moving $12,000 on a Monday morning while your wife is barely unpacked at her friend's house borders on vindictive. It feels aggressive. Where is the line between legally protecting yourself and acting out of financial spite?
That is the exact accusation Sarah attempts to level at him later in the saga. To parse the difference, We have to examine the legal definitions and the practical realities of financial abuse versus financial boundary setting.
Okay, break that down for us.
Financial abuse is designed to trap an individual. It involves starving a partner of the necessary resources for survival food, shelter, basic transportation to force their compliance or punish them.
And financial boundary setting.
Which is the mechanism the author is employing is about refusing to allow your resources to be exploited.
The context of their specific situation makes that distinction incredibly sharp. He isn't leaving her destitute on the street.
Not at all. She has an active income stream as a yoga instructor and a graphic designer.
She has secured a safe place to stay with Monica. She is an able-bodied, employed adult. He is simply severing her access to his surplus labor.
And the irony of that $12,000 car fund is profound.
It really is. He was working 70-hour weeks specifically to buy her a Subaru.
That extreme overtime directly created the physical absence in the home that provided her the timeline to plan her affair with Monica.
So moving that specific money isn't spite. It is a literal reclamation of his own life energy. He is stating, through his actions, I will not fund my own replacement.
Socially and culturally, people struggle immensely with this step. They feel unwarranted guilt.
The internal narrative is often, well, we're still legally married. I made vows. I should still support her during this hard time.
But in a high-stress conflict where one party is actively operating in bad faith, which Sarah demonstrably was by lying about her motives and plotting behind his back, you cannot afford to operate on the honor system.
You must secure the perimeter. You must ensure that your own resources cannot be weaponized against you.
By Tuesday evening, the money is secured and the legal paperwork is drafted.
He has quietly and methodically constructed an absolute fortress around his life. While she is likely doing yoga and drinking wine at Monica's, fully believing she is the one controlling the narrative.
And once those financial and legal lines are drawn, he is prepared for the inevitable emotional attacks.
Which brings us to the wall of ice, maintaining emotional distance.
Wednesday arrives, and Sarah texts him. She asks if he's had any time to process his thoughts about them, and if he is ready to have a real conversation about working on their relationship.
He replies that he has had plenty of thoughts and is absolutely ready for a conversation, inviting her over for Thursday evening.
She arrives with takeout food, acting bubbly and excited.
She launches into this monologue about how her time away made her realize how much she missed their life together, and how sometimes you have to step away from a situation to truly appreciate what you have.
She is delivering the exact script Monica likely helped her rehearse to keep the safety net secure.
He lets her finish her speech, and then he slides the freshly drafted divorce papers right across the table over the takeout containers.
He notes that he has never seen a human face change expressions so rapidly.
She goes from nervous excitement to profound confusion and then to violent anger in the span of about 15 seconds.
She demands to know if it's a joke, asking why he's being so dramatic just because she asked for a little space.
And this is the moment he reveals his hand. He tells her he knows exactly what kind of space she was looking for, and he has decided to give her all the space in the world, permanently.
He informs her that he overheard the Tuesday kitchen conversation.
He crushes her carefully constructed narrative in an instant. The mask slips completely.
She attempts a desperate pivot to gaslighting, claiming he misunderstood the context of the conversation.
He counters that effortlessly, stating that if she hasn't actually done anything wrong yet, the divorce will be even simpler. No messy adultery complications, just two people wanting different things.
And I notice that when she realizes the gaslighting has failed, her emotional facade drops, and she instantly pivots to logistics.
Specifically, she pivots to the money. She demands to know about the savings account, claiming she needs it to secure her own apartment and buy a reliable car since she'll be starting over.
Her pivot reveals her true baseline motivations. An innocent person who is suddenly handed divorce papers by their spouse would be emotionally devastated.
They would be begging to explain, terrified of losing the human connection.
Exactly. Her immediate pivot to financial logistics demonstrates that her primary concern was the loss of the resource, not the loss of the relationship.
He calmly informs her that the savings account is closed and the overtime money is locked away. He tells her, funny enough, I decided I didn't want to fund your exploration phase after all.
Ouch. She explodes, accuses him of financial abuse, and storms out of the house.
But that initial confrontation is just the beginning of the emotional siege. Over the next few weeks, she deploys a shifting array of manipulation tactics trying to breach his walls.
Maintaining strict emotional distance during this phase is where most people falter. They survive the initial shock, they secure the lawyer, but then the ex-partner returns crying on the doorstep, and the boundaries collapse under the weight of shared history.
The author maintains his distance by hyper-focusing purely on consequences, completely ignoring her stated intentions or her tears.
It's like treating a subscription service.
Yes, the streaming service analogy. Sarah treated their marriage like a free trial to a streaming platform.
She assumed she could cancel it, go try out a competitor's service for a few weeks, and then casually resubscribe to the original service if the competitor's content wasn't good enough.
She assumed her profile and all her saved data would just be sitting there waiting for her. But he didn't just pause the subscription. He deleted the account from the server and changed the root passwords.
He locked her out of the system entirely. Because she is locked out, we get to observe a textbook escalation of tactics.
Exactly. When the noble quest for self-discovery failed, she moved to financial panic and anger. When anger didn't unlock the bank accounts, she pivoted to raw emotional manipulation.
The very next morning, a Friday, she shows up at his house at 6:30 a.m.
She is crying hysterically, banging on the front door, trying to wake up the neighborhood. She wails that she was just scared of commitment, that he's the best thing that ever happened to her, and she begs for couples counseling.
How does someone actually stay cold in that moment? When the person you have loved and built a life with for 6 years is breaking down in tears on your porch, the biological urge to comfort them is overwhelming.
You have to utilize a psychological technique known as gray rocking.
The objective of gray rocking is to become as uninteresting, unresponsive, and unrewarding as a gray rock.
When a manipulator deploys emotional theater, they're seeking a reaction. Any reaction, anger, pity, sadness, or guilt, all provide a foothold.
They want the dopamine hit of knowing they can still affect your emotional state. If you deny them the reaction, you deny them the foothold.
The author executes this flawlessly. He doesn't open the door and yell at her for waking the neighbors.
He speaks calmly, telling her he appreciates her honesty, but the ship has sailed. He reminds her analytically that she should have wanted to work on the marriage before she started planning an affair.
He remains a completely unrewarding target.
Mm.
He constantly anchors himself to the timeline. He reminds himself that she is only sorry she got caught.
If he hadn't come home early and cleaned that sensor in 20 minutes, she would currently be cheating on him.
And the evidence supporting this timeline keeps stacking up. During that porch conversation, she finally admits there was a specific target, a guy from her yoga studio.
The external validation he receives regarding this yoga guy is crucial for maintaining his own sanity during her gaslighting campaign.
He actually receives a phone call from the yoga guy a few days later.
Wait, really? The guy called him?
Yeah. The guy explains that he had absolutely no idea Sarah was married. Sarah had told him they were already separated and in the middle of divorce proceedings.
When a mutual acquaintance mentioned that Sarah and her husband were actually still happily married, the yoga guy backed off completely and severed contact.
That phone call is an incredible piece of data. It proves definitively that Sarah's tears on the porch at 6:30 a.m. were not driven by sudden remorse or a realization of true love.
They were the tears of a woman whose grand plan had spontaneously combusted.
The yoga guy rejected her because of the lie. Her exploration phase was canceled due to a lack of willing participants. She only came running back to her husband because Plan B fell through.
Knowing that makes the wall of ice much easier to maintain. But when emotional theater fails, manipulators will often escalate to biological manipulation.
The nuclear option.
On a Tuesday, she texts him demanding to meet for logistics. She arrives looking exhausted and stressed out and drops a massive bomb. She claims she is pregnant.
This is the exact moment where the vast majority of people would break. The amygdala would hijack the brain all over again. Panic, overwhelming guilt, a sense of obligation, and a complete, terrifying rewrite of the future would take over.
But our author refuses to panic.
He states that after about 10 minutes of rapid mental math, he realized the timeline simply didn't work.
They had not been intimate since before she started dropping hints and moved out, which was barely 3 weeks prior.
It was far too early for obvious symptoms and highly unlikely for a standard test to be definitive.
He applies empirical logic to an emotional hand grenade. He gray rocks the pregnancy claim, just like he gray rocked the crying.
He doesn't call her a liar, and he doesn't scream at her. He calmly states, okay, let's go to a doctor together tomorrow and get official medical confirmation.
Her reaction to empirical logic is immediate backpedaling.
She claims she's not ready for a doctor yet, needs time to process, but insists they owe it to their child to call off the divorce and work things out.
He stonewalls her completely. He tells her they will handle all co-parenting logistics through their respective lawyers once medical confirmation is provided, but he will not make major life decisions based on vague symptoms.
And sure enough, a few days later, she texts him to admit it was a fake pregnancy.
Hmm.
She confesses she just hoped the shock of it would make him halt the divorce proceedings.
It is a staggering display of how far someone will go when they lose control of a narrative.
When biological manipulation fails to breach the defenses, the situation enters its most dangerous phase.
Sarah and her enabler, Monica, escalate to full-blown external warfare. They shift from trying to manipulate him internally to trying to destroy his boundaries from the outside.
This brings us to the attacks on his public life. First, they target his professional stability.
Someone, obviously Sarah or Monica, calls his company's HR department, claiming he's going through a messy divorce and might be emotionally unstable at work.
He works in industrial sales, managing massive accounts with warehouse managers, and suddenly he is sitting in an HR office defending his mental state.
The psychological intention here is pure sabotage. If they cannot control his personal life or his resources, they will attempt to destabilize his professional foundation as a punishment tactic.
Then they attack his assets again. Sarah calls his mortgage company, posing as Mrs. Thompson, which is deeply ironic considering she never legally took his last name.
She tries to bypass the security protocols to get information on assuming the mortgage, hoping to circumvent the prenup.
And then we get the truly bizarre, almost theatrical harassment.
Monica, the best friend, actually drives to his neighborhood. She cosplays as a social worker, approaching his 70-year-old neighbor to ask if the author is aggressive, controlling, or showing signs of domestic violence.
The neighbor, fortunately, asks for a formal ID and a business card, prompting Monica to flee.
But the escalation continues to a physical breach.
He comes home late one night from a legitimate emergency call at work and finds his front door slightly ajar.
He doesn't rush in, he calls the police.
They clear the house, and he finds a set of keys sitting on his kitchen counter, Sarah's keys. She let herself in, walked around his sanctuary, and left her keys behind.
Leaving the door ajar and leaving the keys is undeniable psychological warfare. It sends a clear message. I can still get to you. Your fortress isn't secure. I am in your head, and I am physically in your house.
If a listener's ex-partner is sneaking into their house, and the ex's best friend is cosplaying as a social worker in their neighborhood, how do they defend against that kind of siege?
The author provides a flawless blueprint for utilizing institutional boundaries. First, document everything, but do not engage emotionally with the perpetrators.
When he found the open door, he didn't call Sarah screaming. He called the police. He created an official, time-stamped paper trail.
He didn't file criminal charges right then, but he had sworn officers document that she entered the premises without permission.
Then he changed all the locks and installed security cameras. He reinforced the physical boundaries objectively.
He applied that same objective reliance on systems during the HR meeting.
The temptation when called into HR under false pretenses is to trauma dump, to passionately explain to HR how unhinged your ex is acting.
He didn't do that. He kept it strictly professional.
He briefly explained that he was going through a divorce, that it was entirely handled by his legal counsel, and that it has zero impact on his work performance.
His manager backed him up, pointing out that his sales numbers were actually up due to the overtime.
He let the corporate HR system process the complaint objectively, rather than getting dragged into the mud. He relied on the mortgage company's authorization protocols to keep her out of his accounts.
Let the systems do the heavy lifting. The psychology of the enabler, Monica, is fascinating here.
Enablers, sometimes referred to as flying monkeys in psychological literature, often use other people's dramas to play out their own unresolved issues through a process called projective identification.
Monica is a divorced woman projecting her own bitter divorce onto Sarah's marriage.
Monica needs Sarah to blow up her marriage so Monica doesn't feel alone in her post-divorce reality.
She actively participates in the shadow campaign because destroying the author validates her internal worldview that all marriages are traps and all husbands are the enemy.
The author handles Monica through direct confrontation, but he does it within a strictly legal framework.
He calls Monica directly. He doesn't call her to argue about Sarah's feelings or defend his character.
He calls her to put her on official legal notice. He calls her out on impersonating a social worker, explicitly stating it is potentially a criminal offense.
He lists her actions, contacting his HR department, calling the mortgage company, harassing his neighbors, and formally labels it as a harassment campaign.
He essentially turns the floodlights on in the shadow campaign. Monica attempts to call him paranoid, claiming she hasn't done anything wrong, but he points out that sneaking around a neighborhood asking elderly residents about domestic violence isn't a legal strategy, it's desperation.
She hangs up on him, but the boundary is set. He lets the enabler know, I see you, I am documenting your actions, and I am fully prepared to use legal mechanisms against you.
Enablers operate best in the shadows, free of consequences. Once threatened with legal exposure, they usually retreat rapidly.
All of this meticulous preparation culminates in the final boundary, the court system.
Sarah's lawyer files a motion for temporary spousal support, claiming the author hid assets during the separation and left her unable to support herself.
This is where the mental grounding, the tactical securing of finances, the emotional distance, and the relentless documentation all coalesce.
The judge reviews the motion and denies Sarah's request for spousal support completely.
The prenup held up under scrutiny, and crucially, the author had pristine documentation showing that the $12,000 he moved was generated solely from his own recent overtime work, which was protected under the agreement.
He didn't hide marital assets. He protected his individual earnings exactly as the contract stipulated.
The judge wasn't swayed by the emotional theater or the baseless claims of financial abuse.
The paperwork, the timeline, and the documentation spoke for themselves. The legal system, much like the X-ray we talked about at the beginning, eventually cuts through the murky emotional noise and looks at the hard evidence.
High-stress conflicts, whether a divorce, a toxic business dissolution, or a severe family dispute, are rarely won by the person who yells the loudest or cries the hardest.
They are survived by the person who can remain fiercely objective.
They are won by the person who secures their resources legally and flatly refuses to participate in the dramatic theater the opposing side is attempting to stage.
The author's secret weapon throughout this entire ordeal, aside from his disciplined mind, was his reliance on a community, in this case the Reddit forum, for constant reality checks.
When you are being gaslit, when someone is actively trying to rewrite reality and paint you as the villain simply for having boundaries, you need an external anchor.
You need people who can look at the raw data and say, no, you aren't crazy, this is manipulation.
He outsourced his need for emotional validation to a community so he could remain a cold, calculating machine in his actual life.
We spend so much time in our modern culture focusing on how to communicate better in relationships. We read endless books on vulnerability, active listening, and expressing our deepest feelings.
That is entirely necessary for healthy, good faith relationships. But this story introduces a paradigm shift for when a relationship turns toxic.
What if the ultimate relationship survival skill isn't knowing how to talk? What if it's knowing exactly when communication is no longer a tool for connection, but a weapon being used against you?
That's a powerful thought.
What if the most important skill is knowing exactly when to stop listening and start documenting?
It's a game changer for sure.
If you walked into your kitchen tomorrow and heard something that shattered your reality, would your boundaries hold up to a siege? Or is your front door secretly wide open, with the key sitting on the counter, just waiting for someone to walk in and take control?
Keep your systems secure.
And trust your reality.